Okay, so the webinar has started recording now. So we are all live and recording. We have 21 participants so far, which is great. Welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us. I'm just going to start a quick poll. If you're happy to answer, let me know where you are from. If you're from Ireland or elsewhere, and if you're from Ireland, where in Ireland are you based? I'll hopefully have a few answers popping up there. The same as yesterday now, is so far 100% Irish attendance, which is fantastic. And we have 56% of us are all from Kerry, which is lovely, but we can see Ulster, Leinster and Munster. Other parts of Munster are also represented. I'll just give that another few minutes because there are people still joining us. Excellent. Okay, so we have 100% Irish attendance, 63% sitting here in Kerry, in the same county as myself and Trish and Tim, and some from other areas in Munster and some in Leinster and Ulster. So thank you all so much for joining us and welcome to this evening's webinar. I'll stop the poll now and I'll start sharing my screen. So this evening's talk is going to be all about Rhododendron Ponticum, which is an invasive species that we have here in the Kerry Biosphere Reserve area. So just to quickly give you a heads up on how the evening is going to run, we'll have 3 speakers. So myself, I'm Eleanor Turner, the Biosphere Officer working with South Kerry Development Partnership. Patricia Dean will be joining us as well. She's Project Manager for the McGillicuddy Reeks European Innovation Partnership Project. And then finally, Tim Callahan, who's a specialist in treating rhododendron. We'll take questions at the end, so if you're happy to hold off on your questions, we'll run through at the end. There should be a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen that you can type your questions into. So to start off with, I'm going to give a quick introduction to what the Kerry Biosphere Reserve area is. So it's a UNESCO designated reserve area. And biosphere reserves are places where nature and culture connect. So they're normally designated as areas that are recognized for their biological diversity, yet also the activity, and they're managed to promote a balanced relationship between people and nature. So it's not just about conserving nature, it's about how we can interact with it in terms of our livelihoods, our economy, our recreation, and how we can do that in a balanced and sustainable way. I get asked what UNESCO stands for a lot, so I've thrown this slide in here. So UNESCO is the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization. So if that ever comes up in a pub quiz, you'll all know the answer. So where is the Kerry Biosphere Reserve? So loosely, it's around here, around the McGillicuddy Reeks and the Killarney Lakes area. This is a much more detailed map of the Kerry UNESCO Biosphere Reserve. And on it, you can see the 3 core areas. So the 3 areas are criteria that need to be met for the designation of a UNESCO Biosphere Reserve. The red area in the center is the core zone, and that coincides with the Killarney National Park area. Originally, when the Kerry Biosphere Reserve was designated back in 1982, it was just the area of the Killarney National Park. And in 2017, it was extended to include the buffer zone and the transition zone. So in the buffer zone, you start to see some of the interaction between human use of the area and management for biodiversity and environmental protection. And then in the transition zone is where you start to encourage sustainable use by communities. And you'll see there's a lot of nice towns inside the transition zone of the Kerry UNESCO Biosphere Reserve as well, like Beaufort, Fussa, Killarney, Glenflesk and Baraduff. So the 3 core areas, as I said, the core area in the center is usually a protected area. In Killarney National Park obviously has several designations. There's a special protected area. It's designated as a Natura 2000 site. And some of the buffer zone of the Kerry Biosphere Reserve is also under designation. So there are special areas of protection or special areas of conservation, and natural heritage areas also included within that. So just to quickly run through some of the habitats of the Kerry Biosphere Reserve. To start off with, a habitat is a place where an organism makes its home. And habitat meets all of the environmental conditions an organism needs to survive. So for an animal, that means everything it needs to gather food and successfully reproduce. Some of the protected habitats we have here in Kerry are freshwater habitats, bogs, raised bogs, and blanket bogs. We have upland habitats of wet and dry heaths, which Trish will be talking a lot about later. And we also have a lot of woodlands that you find in the Clarny National Park area, which are old sessile oak woods and alluvial forest. It's important to mention these because a lot of these habitats are under threat from invasive species. And the invasive species that we're going to be talking about tonight, of course, is rhododendron. When we say invasive species, what we mean is an animal or a plant that has been introduced through human activity. The problem with this is that they can displace native species and cause an imbalance in native ecosystems. So a native species occurs naturally in the area and an invasive species is introduced through human activity. So again, the Rhododendron Ponticum here, a nice little sketch of it. This is what we're going to be discussing for the rest of the evening. But first we're going to hear a little bit from Patricia Dean, who's project manager of the McGillicuddy Reeks EIP project. And they're working on managing the rhododendron through their project. She's going to run through some of that for us. Thanks for joining us, Trish.
Thanks, Eleanor. So, what are we? Well, I work for South Kerry Development Partnership also, and I'm working at the moment, as Eleanor said, as project manager for the McGillicuddy Reeks EIP project. What is it we're doing? We're developing innovative actions for high nature value farming in the McGillicuddy Reeks. So that's a term people are probably hearing a little bit more now of. High nature value farming, H&V areas they're usually called. A lot of people, I suppose, would refer to them previously as marginal land, but now we know that actually, no, that's where a lot of our clean water comes from, our carbon sequestration. There's areas for recreation. So, and these obviously are really unique habitats and have unique species. So obviously in the McGillicuddy Reeks, we'd have the Kerry slug, for example, hangs out above in the McGillicuddy Reeks. So we are one of 23 agri-environmental projects, European Innovation Partnership projects in Ireland, and our project partners are obviously the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine, and then we have a number of local partners as well, Crowley Consultants, Kerry County Council, Tralee IT, McGillicuddy Reeks Mountain Access Forum, in PWS and Tagish are all part, and obviously we have farmer representatives as well at the heart of the operational group. So next slide please. Where is it funded from? So I obviously mentioned the Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine. I'd be killed if I didn't, because they're our funders, but it comes under Ireland's Rural Development Programme 2014 to 2020. Okay. So why did we establish the project? Why was there a need for these projects? Well, it was all about trying to enable and encourage landowners to continue upland hill farming, but it was all about the development of sustainable agricultural management practices. So it's things that have to work with the farmers. So we work hand in hand with the farmers. So on the project team, myself, we have a part-time project ecologist and a part-time administrator. So we're quite a small project, but I think we're definitely boxing above our weight in terms of what we're been able to deliver so far, because we're working in close conjunction with farmers. And so it is developing in collaboration with farmers, innovative management interventions. So it's all about trying new things, trying different things, listening to the farmers, looking at the landscape, and seeing how we can improve and conserve and manage our farmed habitats in these areas. So it is, we're doing a lot of work on the development of collectives, and we'll talk about that specifically in terms of rhododendron in a few minutes. We're also trying to create a positive outreach programme because I suppose all of the McGillicuddy Reeks are designated special area conservation, and a lot of people wouldn't know why the land is designated, including the farmers themselves. They might know that it is designated, but they might not necessarily know what it was designated for. So a lot of the work we're doing in the project is training and outreach to raise awareness of these protected habitats and species. Obviously, because McGillicuddy Reeks is home to Carnthool, Ireland's highest mountain, we have huge recreational pressure and a lot of awareness raising to you there in terms of what's permissible and not on this privately owned farmland. So next slide, please, Eleanor. So what are the challenges? I suppose people are saying, well, yeah, that's kind of a bit of a background, but why is that different? It's not that different from a lot of other upland areas. So as I mentioned already, there's 23 other agri-environmental projects in operation in Ireland. So there's the Seuss project in Wicklow, also is another upland project. There is the North Connemara locally led agri-environmental project. There's the Inish project in Donegal. So there's the Blackstairs project that covers Carlow, Wexford, that those upland areas there and the Blackstairs. So we're all kind of dealing with similar enough issues, but maybe in different ways and slightly different challenges then depending obviously on the terrain. So this is a lovely photo of the McGillicuddy Reeks, so it's not your normal farmland. It's challenging terrain, there's no doubt about it. And the other there on the map, you can see the area that's currently being covered. The areas in green are where we've brought in participant farmers. And some areas are kind of a little bit more clustered. You're kind of saying, that's not very fair. That's probably due to the fact that we would have high concentrations of rhododendron in those areas. Okay, so next slide, please. So what are the difficulties and the challenges? Well, it is, like I mentioned already, raising awareness. That's why I was trying to express that. Holding the plant in the hands, like we have nature in our hands. We need to work together to try and improve it. The economic return from upland hill farming is very, very difficult. There's very low margins, if any margins at all, very low profitability. So the economic return, that's why it's challenging. That's why there's very few people, young people becoming involved. So we have a lot of succession issues in these upland areas. The climate change, we're all talking about climate change, and obviously the map, I think, there of Ireland, very close, shows very clearly the level of rainfall that we have in Ireland along the west coast particularly, and obviously that has a massive impact as well then for possible flooding, sedimentation for rivers and lakes, and so on and so forth. Rural isolation, that's what I was trying to demonstrate there, and I liked that image that I stole from the Irish Examiner, the farmer feeling sometimes that he's cut off from everybody else. There are two images of farmers that we have here in the McGillicuddy Reeks. Obviously, the traditional sheep farming is a big thing still in the McGillicuddy Reeks, but obviously, you know, it's extremely hard labour practices, whether it's going up the mountain to gather a couple of sheep. And every upland sheep farmer that's watching tonight will understand that it could be the 3 or 4 sheep that are missing that could take you a week to find. So you do need the support and the collective approach. You need neighbours to come together to try and to manage these unenclosed cottages. Okay, and then obviously there's another photo there. The conditions are hard. Come winter time, the snow comes down. It often resembles the Alps, not the Reeks, who are going out there and trying to manage the livestock on the mountain. So I suppose there's lots of questions, but there's also lots of solutions. So it's about bringing everyone together and try to make it work. So there are a few of our challenges that we're facing. Next slide, please. So again, then on the practical side of it, so I'll give you the bit of the historical and the current kind of social things, but the other issues then on the ground. So you can see here bracken. So like obviously bracken is a fern which is native and naturally found in heathland. But in certain situations it can, like after a big fire, or if there was a lot of extensive grazing, where grazing levels have been really high, create bare ground. This allows room then for the bracken to come in and take over. And that is a big issue. What does that do then? People are kind of going, well, like if it's part of it, if it's meant to be there, but when it's there too much, it can shade out heather and sphagnum mosses and things like that. It can lead to the loss of heath and bog habitats. So we're looking with farmers that have a lot of bracken to try and control the bracken. And I'll get to it in a few minutes how we're doing that. I can't give the game away too soon, just to make sure that everyone is actually listening to us. And again, the rhododendron, that's a good photo there with the rhododendron in flower. It's probably hard enough to see it when it's not flowering, and Tim will talk about that a bit more later on. But again, it's an invasive species. It's not something to be laughed about or joked about at all, because it is really having a massive impact on the heathland, whether it be wet heath, dry heath, blanket bog. Rhododendron is not afraid to travel, and we'll talk about what it likes to later on. I'm sure Tim will cover that very well. So that's another one of our big targets. Next slide, please, Eleanor. So again here, and if you click on it, I think, Eleanor, we'll get the text that, that appears by itself now. There we go. So a big part of obviously of our project. So we're looking at obviously the agricultural side of it there, and that's why we'd be looking at the rhododendron, because it's invasive as well, taking over farmland, upsetting the condition of the habitats. But and we're looking at the bracken, a lot of practical issues like that and how to deal with the bracken, the best treatment methods, etc. But also the condition of the habitat. And this is where the environmental side comes in. It's quite obvious there from the photograph. I don't think anyone would have to be told which one is better than the other. You know, obviously when you see bare ground, you can see the rock coming up. That obviously wouldn't be a good condition of habitat of peatland. And then you can see the good healthy peatland there with the moss cover looking really good and healthy. And again, that's what we're trying to encourage, more of that. But again, it's all about balance. So you want everyone to continue farming, but just really try and strike the balance a little bit better between agriculture and environment. So next slide, please. So again, a few more of the little challenges and what solutions. So one of the things we looked at, obviously I mentioned that recreation is on the increase, and dogs. I have a picture there of a dog chasing sheep. That was a major issue for us. It's kind of becoming an issue again this year, I suppose, as people are kind of thinking, well, I'm local and maybe, I should be allowed to bring my dog with me, but obviously it's farmed land. So we have landowner rangers in place to try and do some awareness raising on the issues, trying to encourage people to stay on the path, bring home their waste after them, be it organic waste or any other waste. So just kind of a proactive approach. And obviously as well, trying to, I suppose, encourage people to raise their awareness on the fact that the land is designated and is protected, just to raise the awareness of that. And then we do a little bit of work as well on the agri-environmental project, on our European Innovation Partnership project, on trail maintenance and definition. So you can see the photographs there, they kind of speak for themselves. When we started doing a little bit of work a couple of years ago, obviously the paths were very broken down. You can see there from the centre of the track, nobody was walking in the middle of that track. They were walking on both sides, left and right. So you can see the eroded areas there. And with a little bit of help, putting in a bit of a drain, putting in some blockers in the way, that vegetation has now recovered and people are being encouraged again to walk to the centre of the track because it's good and robust and suitable and sturdy. So I think that photograph kind of says it all. So next slide, please. So a big part of our project, guys, we talked about all the challenges. Big part of it now is, well, what do we do to address it? Training. Training is so important for everybody across the board. And every day is a school day. So we would have brought all our participants and a lot of people in the community and brought them along to do the handheld pesticide application training. It's a QQI level 5 training. Because obviously when we're dealing with things like rhododendron and that require the use of pesticides, it's very important training to have carried out. It's vital, actually. You're not supposed to be able to purchase any sprays without having the training done if you're a farmer. So we can see there cattle. So obviously dual grazing has a part to play in the upland areas. Cattle would have been traditionally on the rigs going back years ago, and then I suppose it became harder to manage cattle on closed commonages. I suppose the prices dictate a lot of whether farmers wanted to continue farming or not with cattle. But cattle have a very important role to play. So we were bringing cattle for a number of reasons. One of those reasons was to trample area with bracken. And I suppose there was a big fear with the landowners locally that maybe would the cattle be tempted to eat the bracken. So we're trying to manage that. And then also looking at how they could improve the condition of the habitats. So cattle are very good for eating on the purple moorgrass. It's called Millennia, I suppose, to a lot of people, or locally it's called Fanon. So we tried this in a few areas this year with great results. So it was nearly like strip grazing, fencing the cattle into small areas and getting them to do their little bit of work for us. I'm delighted to report the cattle came down very, very fat, very, very healthy and very, very happy from the areas where they were grazing this year. So again, it's just striking the balance between sheep farming and the cattle grazing, trying to get the dual grazing and trying to get the balance. It's all about balance. You will be so sick of me saying that tonight. Again, there we have one of the guys treating bracken on the land, and he's very blue. From the waist down, he's wearing all his personal protective equipment, and he has his mask on him as well and his gloves. We dye the spray that we're using so we can see what's been sprayed. So for the bracken, not alone are we trying to treat the cattle, we'd also do a little bit of cutting of bracken near watercourses to protect the watercourses. We don't want any spray having any possibility of any chance getting into the watercourses. So we do cutting adjacent to our watercourses or streams or rivers, and spraying is effective. Now, there's constraints with that as well, obviously, of course, and the effectiveness of it, but it does work. But trying different initiatives, because it's an innovation partnership project, it's about trying different things. So we have another picture there at the bottom. That's Kieran Nugent from the fire service. And Kieran would be very, very helpful in terms of raising awareness on controlled burning. So controlled burning is a practice that would have been traditional, and I suppose we've seen really good examples of where it's been done very, very well. And then we've seen examples of where it's been done really, really badly. So again, we're just trying to raise awareness and offer training in that regard. So loads of different little solutions to the issues we face. So next slide, please, Elna. So there we go, guys. I spoke a little bit about the habitats. So a big part of that, obviously, is bringing the farmers themselves out on the ground, explaining to them what we mean about the habitats, what are the positive and negative indicators on the ground, and just raising the awareness. So this year, COVID was challenging, there is no doubt about it. We did some blended learning. We got all of our participants online for a morning session. So they got a little bit of an overview of how bogs form, what wet heats are, what dry heats are, what are the characteristics. Our project ecologists gave a little overview, and it was very good. And then we brought them out on the ground in the afternoon, and we actually walked the ground to explain, well, what are we expecting to see? You know, would you expect western gorse? Yes, you would. It's part of the habitat in the uplands. Bog asphodel, bog bean, bog cotton, cross-leaved heath, trying to identify all the different species and explaining to the farmers how we score their land in terms of the environmental side of it, because it has to be a fair system, you know. Other things, there's a picture of the guys doing a little bit of path work. Yes, challenging, not for the faint-hearted, there's no doubt about it. That's the RoboCut there down the bottom corner. So that was a remote control device, probably around the size of a dining table, that we brought out onto one of the colleges to cut really dense, thick heather that was really kind of gone degenerate. So again, burning isn't always an option. We were going to trial this to see, would this be a possibility for upland areas? One, would it make it halfway up the side of the mountain, which it did? Would it make it back down the mountain, which it did? And would it do the job? So we'll be going back now again to that area to see if the vegetation is recovering after that cut. Is it encouraging new vegetation coming in? We are, obviously, I said, outreach, education, big part of it. So we got into our 5 local national schools there. The kids were delighted when they met the raven and they saw the life cycle of the common toad, common frog, I think, and here I think they're so very, very good as well there to engage with our kids locally. And then the ramp pump, that's a picture of a ramp pump. Again, it's no power source required. It's all based on pressure building up. And again, it's just to keep the livestock away from the watercourses. Protecting our watercourses is huge. And of course, we are very conscious of things like the freshwater pearl mussel. That project is operating beside us, but protecting the watercourses is vitally important. So initiatives like that and little interventions, trialing different things. Obviously, water is essential for carrying out things like the treatment of bracken, but also for livestock. We have livestock on the mountain. So that worked well in some places, and it was good to try it as well. Next slide, please, Eleanor. So this is the guys here, part of our collective group. So when we are looking at all of our farmers' land, we walk the land, the ecologist writes up a farm plan with the farmers. So we try to deal with the issues we can as possible on the ground. But what we did then was there was a number of farmers. Obviously, we couldn't bring in all the farmers, the entire McGillicuddy Weeks into the project. The budget simply wasn't there. So there was a lot of other people still very willing to get involved with the project and support the project. So they availed of the training. And then there was a little collective groups kind of came together. So these are people that have received training. They received training from Tim and how to manage and treat rhododendron. And they've come together to support farmers to deal with the rhododendron on their land. And that's so important. So for us, it's more sustainable to do this, to develop the skills locally. There's a social aspect to it, because obviously with COVID now and general rural isolation, it's a big issue. This is a huge social side to it. So not alone is it the economic side, they can go in, they can be contracted in by the farmer to do a little bit of work, and they can have a bit of crack, as we'd say in Kerry, while they're at it. So a huge social dividend here to the work that's been done. The social side, the environmental side, and the economic. So when you put all those together, we get sustainability. So we would like to think that this is very sustainable because you're developing the skills locally and you're developing the workforce locally as well. We do need, I suppose, a whole area approach, because as you can see from the original map that we looked at, it's just taking in small areas. We would love to be able to expand the project to cover the entire McGillicuddy Weeks and have a long-term commitment as well, because we're getting our farmers all motivated. They see the project as really delivering on the ground. But what we need to do is we need long-term commitment, I suppose, to try and really start improvements. Because our project is only 4 years, it's a very short space of time to show real improvement on the condition of the habitats. So I suppose we do think there's light at the end of the tunnel. There would be scope for developing a national uplands project with local teams and local operational groups. And it would address probably a lot of the biodiversity challenges that we face. So I think that's it, Eleanor, from me. It's probably Tim next. Thank you.
Thanks, Patricia. Fantastic. Great to hear all of the work being done by a project, and it always amazes me when I hear you go through it all. I know we work quite closely, but when you actually lay out all of the different aspects of the project, there's a lot of work being done by a small group, and the support from the farmers is fantastic to see as well. So great to hear. So we'll pass on to Tim Cahalan now with no further ado. And Tim's going to talk to us a little bit more about the rhododendron management in the national park. Thanks, Tim.
Good evening all. So this evening I'm going to talk to you about rhododendron, where it comes from when it was brought into the Killarney area, why it's such an ecologically destructive plant, and we look at the best practice methods to treat those plants and get rid of it. And we'll touch on some of the work that goes on in Killarney National Park in controlling rhododendron also. Next slide there, please. So rhododendron is a member of the Ericaceae family. There are over 900 varieties found worldwide. Only one causes a problem for us, Rhododendron Ponticum. So it was first introduced into Britain in 1763. It became popular, especially with the estates, and they planted it out for ornamental value, for cover for game shooting, and also as shelter belts around exposed dwellings and such. There are records of large rhododendron growing in the Derrycunny area of Killarney National Park from the 1840s, so it was believed that it may have been planted out in the area first in the early 1800s. Next slide there, please. Rhododendron, some of the morphological attributes of rhododendron, it's a broadleaf evergreen plant. It has thick waxy leaves. In dense woodland it tends to grow as a single stem plant, and in the open areas where it has more exposure to light, it tends to grow more as a multi-stemmed plant. And of course, if you cut down a rhododendron, a single stem plant, without treating it, it will grow back also as a multi-stem plant, and it can reach heights of up to 8 meters. Next slide there, please. So where does rhododendron come from? On this map you can see both its native ranges and also its alien distributions. You can see its largest native range is in areas around the Black Sea. If you look to the western side of Europe, you'll see a few dark spots around western Spain and Portugal, around the Iberian Peninsula. Most Irish rhododendron is of Iberian origin, and if you look at the map up to Ireland and Britain, you can see the grey areas. It will grow in areas that are it's invasive in areas that are suited to it. Next slide there, please. So why is rhododendron so invasive over here? Well, first of all, we've the perfect climatic conditions for it. We've a mild temperate climate, we've no extremes, and it's a fairly damp climate. So all those factors are perfect for rhododendron. Rhododendron is also an acid-loving plant, so it loves those damp, heavy acidic soils that we have over the old red sandstone. It provides the perfect medium for rhododendron to grow in. It is also a prolific seed producer. I will touch a bit more on that later on. So when a mature plant starts producing seed, it will produce annually, and it has the ability to produce high volumes of seed on an annual basis. Also, the leaves on rhododendron are toxic, so while grazing animals such as deer and feral goats will graze on our native flora, they leave rhododendron untouched, so it gives it that extra competitive advantage also over native plants. Next slide there, please. So why is rhododendron so ecologically damaging? Well, if left unmanaged and if it's left get away, it will eventually outcompete native plants. It will form dense impenetrable thickets, and it will shade out lights and the light from the woodland floor. It will prevent natural regeneration, and eventually you will be left with a kind of a woodland understory and woodland floor that's devoid of our native flora. Next slide, please. So a little bit about the reproductive ecology of rhododendron. It from the time it germinates, it takes about 10 to 12 years before it starts producing flowers and seed. It flowers around May and June in that kind of a purple type of flower. Eventually the petals fall off and you're left with these green capsules, and then from around November until April, those capsules slowly dry out and they open up and they start dispersing seed. And each flower head can produce between 3,000 and 7,000 seeds. Each one of those seeds is a potential plant, and it will germinate given the right conditions, which we have plenty of. And it is dispersed mostly by wind, but also by grazing animals would carry it by its fur, and it can be transported by water courses, and of course it can be transported by our own clothes as well. Next slide there, please, Eleanor. So this slide there gives a very good illustration of the insidious and destructive nature of rhododendron. This is a wonderful area of oak woodland down there, Beaufort, that Mick O'Connell brought me down to a number of weeks ago. Many of you would know Mick through the Mehel and through the Reeks project. Rhododendron started invading this woodland from one side. Its source was from a private dwelling, and it started creeping into the woodland. Mick went in and he stem treated the plants and to stop it in its tracks, and done a good job of doing so. But you can see on the right the area of woodland that hasn't been invaded by rhododendron. It has a very vibrant species-rich herbaceous layer, which is in turn supporting plenty of pollinating insects and birds and so forth. And then on the left hand side you can see where the rhododendron got in, and it completely annihilated and devastated the woodland floor of all those species. So next slide there, please, Eleanor. So how do we treat rhododendron? In Clarny National Park there was a number of methods that were tried and tested over the years. However, the park started using the stem treatment method from the late 2000s on, and it has been proven to be very, very successful. It's a very, very simple and effective method, and it really is our go-to method that we use now for all sizes of rhododendron, from saplings right up to the large plants. So it involves making cuts or holes in the base of the rhododendron plant and applying a solution of glyphosate then to those cuts. For plants, single stem plants, for 2 meters and under a 5% solution or a 1 in 20 parts water to glyphosate solution, we apply for those size. Then for larger plants, you need a stronger solution going right up to 14% solution for the largest plants, or a 1 in 7 solution. So next slide there, please, Eleanor. So there's a number of ways of applying the stem injection method. We often use hatchets, as you can see in the top left corner. So that involves in making cuts at the base of the plant. It's important that you make an even amount of cuts around the circumference of the stem. I often see people, they'd make 5 or 6 cuts on one side of the stem and no cut on the other side, and only one half of the plant would die. Whereas if they just made a single cut at either side, it would do the job completely and fill up those cuts. Then for larger plants, you'd need to do more than 2 cuts. You might need to do a cut every 2 to 3 inches around the circumference of the plant, and you need to make the cuts also below the last leaf of the plant, and the herbicide then is taken up in the stem up into the leaves of the plant. If there are leaves below the cut, those leaves tend to stay alive, and the plant will eventually make a recovery and go on to fight another day. On the top right hand corner is stem treatment using a chainsaw. You can see those, they're plunge cuts made by a chainsaw, very fast and effective method in mature rhododendron stands. You just do the cut into the stem and fill up the cuts then with your solution of glyphosate. On the bottom left corner is a multi-stem plant, and you can see the leaves at the bottom of the plant. All those leaves need to be knocked away with a hatchet or knocked off before you stem treat, or they'll stay alive. And each one of those stems needs to be treated as an individual plant, and each one of them stems need to be individually treated as well. And on the bottom right hand corner of the screen, you can just see the Hosilock handheld applicator that we use then to apply the herbicide. And you'll see the blue marker dye, it's Blazon blue. It's a non-toxic dye that just indicates that the plant has been treated with colour. Next slide there, please. So I suppose over the years there was a number of different methods used to treat rhododendron in the park, and a lot of those, some of those methods were abandoned and for good reasons, and deemed as inappropriate methods. Now, on the top left hand side of the screen, before I suppose the stem treatment method was known in the park, one method to use was to cut down the rhododendron, leave it regrow, and then foliar sprayed the leaves with a 2% solution of glyphosate, and those leaves then would take the herbicide down into the plant. That method is very, very labor intensive, and it requires 2 visits before the plant finally dies. And there's also a lot of collateral, it's not very targeted, and there can be a lot of untargeted collateral damage as a result of it. Also, if you can see the way those plants have been cut, it doesn't really leave for a very safe working site afterwards either. On the top right hand screen, you can see pull plants that were left hanging up on trees. That method is okay if the plants are loosely rooted in the ground and they're easy to pull up and there's only a couple of plants around. However, if they're strongly rooted in the ground, the stems can break and they can regrow then again as a multi-stem plant. and also in areas where there's high volumes of plants growing, it cause too much soil disturbance and damage, and you do a lot of uprooting on already thin forest soils. On the bottom left corner is a big root ball of a big rhododendron that was dug up out of the ground. Again, that would have taken a lot of time and effort to get that out of the ground, whereas it could be treated in a matter of minutes with the stem treatment method. And an untreated root ball like that, there's every chance it could start sending roots back down into the ground again. On the bottom right hand corner of the screen is a rhododendron bush that, again, there was foliar sprayed, and you can see all the dead grass around it. Again, a bit of wind, a bit of drift can carry the herbicide when foliar spraying is in operation. And also all that grass would have acted as a buffer zone, preventing somewhat of seed germinating or making contact with the soil. And once it's killed off like that, it's opening up the ground for further infestation. So it's actually a very much counterproductive way of dealing with rhododendron, and can escalate the problem. Also, fires will have the same effect. If ground is being burnt off near rhododendron, it will quickly infest those burnt areas, and burnt rhododendron, while the top of it will burn, the roots stay alive, and it will regrow as a multi-stemmed plant and much more difficult to deal with. So next slide there, Eleanor, please. So there are two main critical phases to the treatment of mature stand of rhododendron. The first phase is stem treat the mature plants that are in a woodland. But a lot of people might think that's the end of the process, but unfortunately it's not. It's only the beginning really of the process. There's a lot bigger job involved in phase 2, because you need to clear the brash, the thickets of dead rhododendron that have been killed in the initial phase, to make the area more manageable. And then also when the light gets into the woodland floor, there's a massive seed bank of seed left in the woodland floor from the original mature rhododendron plants. And once the light gets through to that, they'll start regenerating, and eventually you'll have big carpets of rhododendron seedlings coming up through that, and they'll have to be dealt with as well. And then after that, you have subsequent phases, follow-up visits and maintenance, getting any missed plants, and of course the fact that the area had been infested in the first place means it will always be vulnerable to infestation and will need ongoing management indefinitely. But once you get past phase 2, the subsequent phases get easier and easier. Next slide, please. So in this slide, you can see the results of treatment after phase 1. On the left-hand slide, you can see just the leaves on the woodland floor after dropping, just as the plants are starting to die off. And on the right-hand side, you can see all the mature rhododendron plants fully dead now. And you can see the light coming through the woodland canopy as a result as well. And it's a much brighter looking place. Next slide there, please. So on this slide, you can see I suppose, the beginnings of phase 2. You can see on the left-hand slide, they're regenerating saplings after coming up through the dead brash. And on the right-hand picture, you can see just the brash after being cut down, cleared with a chainsaw, and then piled up into either windrows or brash piles. Next slide there, please. So this slide shows phase 2 on completion. On the left-hand side again, you can see some of the dead standing saplings that were killed off and some of the piled brash heaps. And on the right-hand side, you can see the cut stumps of the old mature rhododendron that was originally there, the dead stuff, and you can see the standing dead saplings as well that were treated after. These pictures, they were taken in a woodland called Gurtiksan. Some people might know it near the 5 Mile Bridge. It was initially treated for mature rhododendron in 2008 and 2009, and we've been in there working with volunteers for the last couple of years, clearing the old dead stuff and treating any emerging rhododendron coming up underneath it then also. Next slide there, please. So here's a picture of a voluntary group out dealing with regenerating rhododendron there on one of our sites. And again, you can see there's a lot of work involved because each plant has to be dealt with individually. Next slide, please. So in Clarny National Park, there's about 31 hectares of rhododendron infestation to varying degrees. We've those areas divided up into 71 management zones, and 53 of those zones are under what we call active management. Excuse me. So what do we mean by active management? It means that we keep those areas to a certain level that rhododendron is never allowed to become a dominant plant in those areas. So it's not allowed to impede on the ecological integrity of those areas. Next slide there, please. So here's another example of, I suppose, a phase 2 management zone. We have a big group of volunteers with students and members of Voluntary Service International in a phase 2 place, and they're all working away. So it does require a lot of effort to manage these sites. Next slide, please. So on this slide there is a satellite image of Clarny National Park. Each one of those dots represents a management zone. The green zones are areas that are under active management, and the orange dots represent zones that have never received any management. So a lot of those orange dots would be around Tork Mountain and also around Glenagh, and if those areas were ever to be dealt with, it would need considerable investment and take years and years of work to get under control. Next slide there, please. So Clarny National Park, we've a number of strings to our bow when it comes to managing our rhododendron, and well, at least we did before COVID took over anyway. So we had an all year round student volunteer program, so that would involve students coming from different universities from all over Europe studying various land science courses, and there could be 8 students with us all year round, going to various different management zones every day, and they've done tremendous work over the last number of years, keeping rhododendron at bay in those zones. To the right of that is a picture of Voluntary Service International. They're volunteers that come to us during the summertime. There are 4 2-week work camps over the summer, and they work with our students, and we can go out with big numbers and tackle good big areas when they're with us over the summer period. The picture below is Killarney Mountain Mehel. They're local volunteers. They've been doing some sterling work also in the park over the last number of years. They've done a lot of rhododendron work, especially around the Muckross and Dynus areas in around Poolwood, and Menshed have also worked alongside them on outings over the last number of years also. And along with the great work that gets done by them, it's also a great social occasion for everyone that gets involved. On the bottom left-hand side, with pictures of contractors, we have a number of areas that go out to contract every year, mostly areas that are unsuitable for volunteers, maybe due to scale or due to the type of terrain. So next slide there, please. So other challenges to the long-term survival of Killarney woodlands. Here is an area that had been cleared of rhododendron. There was a small area of fencing put up in the middle, so the deer couldn't get at it, and you could see in the area that was fenced off, there has been good recovery. You can see species like heather, holly, and mountain ash coming up, and then absolutely nothing on the outside of it. Deer are preventing the recovery of it. In fact, you can see just at the bottom right hand of the screen a little rhododendron plant just coming up, and it's not been touched. So rhododendron will infest the bare area a lot quicker than it will the area where it's recovering. So overgrazing by feral goats and deer is also a big issue in Killarney National Park. So next slide, please. So to sum up, what is required for effective control of Rhododendron Ponticum in Killarney National Park, we need a long-term strategic plan, effective and efficient environmentally friendly control methods. We have the year-round student internship program, voluntary service, international work camps, adopt the woodland scheme with the Mountain Mehel and other organisations like Menshed, and also we've annual contracts for areas not suitable for volunteers. So that concludes my presentation on rhododendron, and thank you for your attention.